Dennis Mitchell says to Mr. Wilson, his next-door neighbor.
So Dennis the Menace.
Well, it's Dennis Mitchell. All right, Dennis the Menace. Okay, let's call him by his title rather than his name.
Okay.
So Dennis the Menace says to his next-door neighbor, Mr. Mitchell, you know I love you, right? Mr. Mitchell says, yeah, I know you. You bust my horns quite a bit, Dennis, but I know you're fond of me. And Dennis says, well, then you won't mind the fact that I just called the cops, and they'll be here in a few minutes to arrest you for hiring illegals to do your yard work.
Oh, boy.
No. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Gene Hislop, my co-host. Al Robinson, our guest this evening, talking about the Danbury 11 case. This is part 2 of the previous show.
Well, again, we're talking, like you said, we're talking about the Danbury 11 case. In the first episode of your show,
yeah.
Excuse me, we talked about the case, pretty much general about what the case was all about, and that the case was actually settled. And in this particular segment, I wanted to talk about not as much about the case per se, but more about the mayor's statements, what the mayor said about the city's participation in the raid that happened. And just for your viewers again, just go back and recall this. Back in September 2006, some day laborers were picked up over at Kennedy Park by a officer.
Combination.
Working undercover, posing as a contractor, picked up a bunch of day laborers, brought them down to the Danbury Police Department, where they were later booked and charged on immigration violations. And from there, we had what was called the Danbury 11 lawsuit transpired from there. And the end result is that the city of Danbury just paid out a $400,000 settlement to take care of the matter and just get it going so they can walk away from it.
Presumably with also certainly in excess of $1 million in legal fees for the city.
Legal fees as well. So what I want to do is let's just go back in time, because it's very hard for people to take comments that people made and think about the comments that they made and the time in which they made it.
Yeah.
All right, so in my following video clip that I have for you guys, we're going to go back to December of 2006, where the mayor stated not just the one reporter, not just the two reporter, but just the multiple reporters and journalists at that time that Danbury played no part whatsoever in the raid that happened down at Kennedy Park. It was a federal operation. Again, the city played no role. This is what the mayor stated.
Yes.
And then we're going to fast forward in this particular video clip up to September of 2007 when the lawsuit was actually filed. And you'll see in this video that I'm going to speak directly to the attorneys in Yale and say, hey, when did you find out that Danbury was involved? And what did you find out? How involved were we? And you'll get to see the responses. And then afterwards, after this press conference was done, the mayor held a press conference where he was questioned by members of the state media. Some of these people were the same people that the mayor stated he talked to back in December when he said Danbury played no role in this. These reporters were at this press conference and they questioned the mayor about maybe not necessarily statements he made in the past, but they wanted to find out, hey, what was Danbury's role in this? And you'll get to see the mayor's response to it. So not to take up a whole lot of time, because it's very important for people to understand what went down here. Because with a better informed public, you'll make better decisions when it comes to election time. So if you guys are ready in the back room, if you can run that video for us, and we'll take a trip down memory lane.
Really all this is a Freedom of Information complaint dressed up to look like a lawsuit. I mean, this is a bunch of Yale law students that don't have much to do with their time.
Yes, he did once call for Danbury police to be given the power to enforce immigration law, but he says the city was not involved in planning that raid. It was the feds.
Fountain says the city played no part in the September 19th action, but doesn't think there would be a problem if it did.
The arrests were part of a sting operation. A Danbury police officer posed as a contractor and drove a van to Kennedy Park. This is where he picked up workers willing to help tear down a fence.
The surprise was when we got out of the van, we were surrounded by a bunch of men, and we were surprised and frightened because we didn't know what was happening.
The lawsuit claims Danbury police overstepped their bounds by trying to enforce federal immigration law. Ted and Ann, this is where that sting was carried out, where those 11 workers got into a van driven not by a contractor, but by a police officer. A sting, an operation that a lawsuit filed today says was illegal.
On the morning of the 19th, a Danbury police officer went undercover, posing as a contractor. He deceived day laborers at Kennedy Park into thinking he had a job for them. He drove them to a parking lot where they were immediately surrounded, arrested, and placed in police custody. No questions asked. The sting operation was conducted with no specific targets in mind. The undercover officer picked up whomever he could get in the crowd of Latino day laborers. He had no idea of the plaintiffs' names, where they were from, or what their immigration status might be. All he knew was that they were Latino day laborers standing in a place that the city didn't want them to stand. Without a formal agreement with ICE, which Danbury does not have, local police lack the authority to make civil immigration arrests. Federal courts across the country have consistently affirmed that only the federal government can enforce federal immigration law.
Back in December, when you filed the FOI suit, Mayor Bowden on Channel 8 and on Channel 30 stated that Danbury police played no part in the raid. When did you find out that the Danbury police officer was driving the van?
When did we find that out?
What time? This was, I think if I'm correct, Mayor Bowden made these statements back in December. When did you find out?
Right. Yeah. We found out in, what was it, perhaps April? That's right. So actually we've learned this in the immigration proceedings where we're seeking to suppress the unlawfully obtained evidence. The government, in their brief that they submitted to the court, actually said that it was a Danbury police officer driving the van. And so according to ICE, it was a Danbury operation.
Besides the person driving that van, were there any other officers, Danbury police officers, involved in the raid, and if so, how?
Absolutely. They were in the parking lot when the men were arrested and were among those who surrounded the men at the parking lot and arrested them. They are named as defendants in this suit because of the actions that they had.
Just for a little context and background here, this is after Mayor Bowden had sought to have the police authorization to enforce immigration laws. It was told by the state government or the federal government that the state government that they could not do that.
That's right.
So if what you're saying is true, if the involvement of Danbury police officers is what you're saying it is, does that violate state law, federal law, and
what
does that show?
It violates the Fourth Amendment because it means they didn't have the authority to make the arrest that they carried out. And that's what we're alleging in this complaint. You're absolutely right that the mayor has sought the authorization. Actually, he wanted to have state officers, state troopers deputized to this memorandum of understanding, and was denied. The governor of Connecticut, Jerry Rell, decided that it was bad policy. And so you're absolutely right that the mayor knows and the police chief knows how one would go about enforcing civil immigration law at the local level, and it's only through this memorandum of understanding. And yet they decided, for whatever reason, to do it anyway, which is why we're being sued.
Has the mayor clarified a statement that he made in December?
Not to our knowledge, no.
No.
Recently, we've been apprised of a lawsuit that's been filed by the Yale Law School against the City of Danbury, Chief of Police, and Immigration Customs Enforcement. At this time, I have not seen or reviewed the complaint because, frankly, Yale didn't have the courtesy to give us a copy. So I'm not going to be able to comment on any details of the complaint or any allegations that are in the complaint.
Did federal authorities contact you and ask you to perform this operation, or did you contact them for assistance? Who asked first?
Well, I think at this point, again, without seeing the nature of the complaint, is really something that we're going to discuss now, particularly because of the litigation. That'll all come out of court.
I think it's like that there are freedom of information requests brought 3 months ago that there was a Danbury police officer driving a van or a Danbury police. Is that part of the assistance?
Well, we're not going to get a comment about the specifics of the case. We haven't read the complaint because we haven't received a copy of it yet. But in terms of who assisted who and the actual details and specifics of that event, we just can't comment on it.
The chief just said Danbury assisted us. Is that, am I clear on that?
Logistical assistance.
Logistical.
That's right. The nature of that assistance, we're not going to discuss.
To your understanding, the chief's understanding, who made the initial arrests in this situation?
Again, that's a detail of the operation we're just not going to discuss with you, Mark. We need to read.
Because that's a very public thing. I mean, who made the arrest? You or I?
Well, there's differing opinions on it, but we're not going to comment on that because we haven't read the complaint. We certainly don't know what the nature of the complaint is.
So Hans says, this is the Cats and Jammer Kids, by the way. You're too young. you might know a little bit about it. So Hans says, no, we had nothing to do with it. Now Fritz, he's not going to deny what Hans said. What Fritz is going to say is, well, I'll have to go back and look up and look at the details of their complaint to know what I said.
Well, yeah.
So there you are again. Now again, it's important for people to take this into context. You got to think about when this happened, not based upon what you know now. Think about what happened then and what you knew back then. And again, as you saw in that video clip, Mayor Boughton spoke in those 3 instances to Channel 8, Channel 30, and also to the Hartford Courant.
Yeah.
And in those 3 instances alone, just those 3 alone, he stated that Danbury played no part in that raid. You clearly heard it in the news broadcast.
And he had a chance in between those interviews, obviously, if there were facts he needed to learn from the police department, he had time to learn them.
Well, he had plenty of time to learn that because the press conference that happened afterwards when the lawsuit was filed was like 7 to 8 months later on. All right, and again, in that video you saw, I directly asked the attorneys, when did you find out Danbury was involved and how were they involved? And they described how they're involved. That's when you learned that. That's when we were told about the Danbury police officer was the person driving the vehicle. And if the Danbury police officer is driving the vehicle, that seems that Danbury was involved in the raid somehow.
You get in the wrong car by accident and look in the back and say, oh my God, what are those? Are those customs officials back there?
And again, this raid, this thing that happened at Kennedy Park happened early in the morning in September. So it isn't like the feds came in and said, hey, we got this thing we got to do here. Why don't you get in the van and go do this?
Yeah.
Not at 6 o'clock in the morning.
No, there had to be some forethought and some foreplanning.
Prior planning. So to make a long story short, after that press conference, or during the same time that you saw the press conference, the Fairfield Weekly, and this is really damaging to the mayor, the Fairfield Weekly questioned the mayor about this, and in the statements to the Fairfield Weekly said he stood behind his previous comments.
Which ones?
About Danbury not playing any part in this raid. And he said, he modified it somewhat and said logistics support. And Lord knows we still don't know what logistics means. I mean, does logistics mean that Danbury police were driving the van and picked up these people? I don't think so. Not when I think about the term logistics. So let's fast forward now until 2010, where after all the claims of Danbury not being involved with this action that happened in Kennedy Park, that the mayor stated time and time again in December. Then he modified it a little bit during that other press conference. Now, when you're under oath, things change tremendously once you're under oath.
Being under oath, that's pretty serious stuff.
It changes because you can say one thing to a bunch of people when you're not under oath.
Yeah.
But when you're under oath, and not only when you're under oath, but you're being deposed by the attorneys for the Danbury 11, that changes things.
In other words, lie to you, shame on him. Lie to you, shame on him. lie to the courts. Problems.
You got problems. So, lawyers, he came into this, let me backtrack a little bit here. Mayor Boughton was deposed in this particular case. Finally, we get the facts and the details under oath about what happened in pertaining to this particular action that happened here. And luckily, after all this time, I have a transcript of the deposition that the mayor did.
Aha!
And it would be good to note also that this particular deposition was videotaped as well.
Now, they're not going to come arrest you for having a transcript, are they?
No, this is it's available information here.
Okay, good.
I'd like to interrupt with a brief question. Is there evidence, because it was a point that the press had raised, is there evidence of communication between Mayor Boughton and ICE where Boughton was definitely asking for the assistance of ICE in Danbury prior to this Danbury 11 case?
There has been instances where the mayor has written letters to certain people in the federal government asking for assistance pertaining to the problem of immigration in Danbury.
What he sees as a problem.
What he sees as a problem. Now, the details of him asking for people to come in here and pick these people up in Kennedy Park, I don't know anything about that at this particular time. All I can know is what I focused on was the mayor misleading the public when he said that Danbury played no role in this raid. And right here, and I just want to read this real quick, I'll be as quickly as possible, on page 253, line number 2 of his deposition. And this deposition is over 300 pages long. All right, and page 253, and I'll quote real quick.
And this is under oath?
Under oath.
Okay.
The attorneys for the Danbury 11 stated to the mayor, did the press report a different story as to what happened on September 19th than what you said happened on September 19th? Now, as soon as he stated that, the attorneys for Danbury and the attorneys for the federal government said, objection, objection, objection.
Why?
All right? And this is what the mayor's response was. There were, I'm going to guess, dozens upon dozens of press accounts of what happened, none of them have been right. Many of them never talked to me. There were press accounts that were written today that are completely inaccurate as to from what limited information I know, which I shared with you, already happened. So if you're going to rely on the press as an arbiter of the exact sequence of events of that day, you're going to chase your tail around all day with that. They are never accurate. They are never right because papers have been decimated with reporting. They don't do a lot of reporting. So to answer that question, there are certainly been some inconsistencies right up until 3 months ago in terms of the accounts of what happened on that day. Question from the attorneys. And was there any specific controversy about whether what you said happened was different from what was actually happened? Again, from the attorneys from the city of Danbury, objection. The mayor, I don't recall any controversy.
I don't recall.
Now,
it's a famous.
Our own Ollie North.
Now that was just a few lines out of this. There was a few lines out of this 300-page deposition. Right there, it just basically he's trying to throw the press under the bus, saying, "Well, the press got it wrong.
They heard me wrong.
They heard me wrong." And
on camera,
it's funny that here's again multiple reporters during multiple different periods of time. The mayor stating that Danbury played no part in this raid. And then again, we find out in the deposition, when it finds out that Danbury did play a part in the raid, he's like, well, the press got it wrong. They were completely inaccurate when they stated about me. It's laughable. Well, it's laughable on its face because this is the mayor's own words saying one thing, and he's got completely caught red-handed and not being truthful with the citizens of Danbury about the city's participation in a raid that could have been illegal.
It was expensive at any rate.
It was. Expensive. And I really think that people should, if they have any ability to get their hands on this transcript, read through it, because it's certainly not the only inconsistency in here. At one point, they're questioning him about his views on immigration in general, and at one point he says he doesn't see the day labor issue or even undocumented immigration as a problem, and then he flip-flops not even a page later and says that it's creating huge drains on our law enforcement and housing and zoning and et cetera. So on one hand, it's not a problem. On the other hand, it isn't. And on the other hand, it is. He's constantly flip-flopping.
He's all over the place.
Hans und Fritz.
And if you want to go back again, we'll take a step back a little further. Back in 2005, when the mayor tried to push to have state officers be deputized as immigration agents, he was questioned about, would you want this to happen in Danbury? Would you want local law enforcement to do this? And he said, well, no, because that would be a problem. It might cause a problem between the police department and the immigrant community because of X, Y, and Z. And then suddenly he flip-flops years later and does this program, and people bring up the same points he brought up back then. He's like, well, no, that's not going to happen.
And let's remind our viewership that at one time Mayor Boughton was discussing and very much a proponent of creating a day labor shelter before the Danbury 11 thing even happened. So there's a tremendous amount of inconsistency.
And the day laborer situation came up in this deposition document here, and I didn't want to go down that road because the stuff he said in here is inconsistent with what he said in the press. Because he's flip-flopped so many times on that, it can make your head spin. But here again, and this is my main problem, is that I'm just a citizen journalist here. I just have a site called Hat City Blog, and I just do my thing. I'm not being paid for this. I got better things to do with my time. Than to deal with this nonsense. But when you have people who are paid to do this for a living, reporters who are paid to do this for a living, and they do not report this type of information, they're doing a disservice to everybody. When this deposition first came out, the first report done by the News Times on this didn't even touch on any of the controversies that were brought up from the mayor in regards to this case, especially about Danbury's role in this and the inconsistencies that he said back in 2006 versus what he's saying now. And as well as a lot of other factors. It wasn't until a reporter in New Haven, Mary O'Leary from the New Haven Register, came up with a lot more information that was in the deposition versus what was first reported in the News Times, that the News Times, I think because they probably were embarrassed, came out with a follow-up on the deposition that gave out a little more information, but not even the fact, trying to catch up. They still didn't give out all the facts about this. Like, for instance, when the mayor said, do you agree with that pretext arrests are bad? And the pretext arrest is like, let's just say, for instance, I think you are an illegal immigrant or undocumented immigrant, and I'm going to pick you up for jaywalking. I see you jaywalk. I'm just going to get you for jaywalking, but I'm not really getting you for jaywalking. I want to get you for something else. I'm going to use this as a pretext to get you on something else. Yeah. The mayor said, oh, no, I don't condone that. That's a bad thing. Well, basically, that's exactly what happened in this situation. The reason why the police department was so upset and this whole thing was conducted in the first place was because day laborers on Kennedy Park were allegedly darting out in the street, causing a traffic concern for people driving up and down the street. A car would park or stop on Kennedy Park, and then you get a swarm of people trying to look for work, allegedly. And that was the whole pretext to this entire thing. The funny thing was, if you're picking up these day laborers for a traffic violation, then why weren't they charged for a traffic violation? They were only charged with one thing, which was a federal crime or a federal violation.
Yeah. And there was no series of steps to that point. And as far as people darting in and out of the street, it's probably more likely that part of Danbury's illustrious hate squad was probably trying to mow him down on the sidewalk and chased him into the street.
Well,
trying to mow him down.
Look, I'm more concerned about people darting out in front of Elmer's Diner than the people over at Kennedy Park. But we know that Elmer Palmer is a good Republican and a good friend of Mark, so he gets away with allowing people to run back and forth across the North Street.
Busy street.
A very busy street.
Let's summarize. So what it seems to me that we're saying is not only do we have a mayor who's obviously under whose watch civil rights violations were certainly alleged to and not proven absolutely were, dismissed, these charges. Civil rights violations as far as pretext of race and racial profiling happened. But then we also have that same mayor who should be in charge of his police force doing this sort of thing, then covering up the city's involvement with this. So we have a civil rights violation and a cover-up. Okay, and then we have a local press that refuses to really drill and investigate and expose the misdeeds and the cover-ups of said mayor.
Well, I think I do agree with what you're saying. I think cover-up might be a little strong. I will say that in the mayor's defense, and it's pretty funny for me to say anything, the mayor, use the word mayor in defense in a sentence.
Fair is fair, let's do it.
The mayor, when this all went down, was going on a trip to Brazil. I think he went to a trip to Brazil that actual day it went down. So a lot of things were happening very fluid on that particular day. So he might not have all the facts back then in September. That being said, he probably had more details in December when he made those statements. And he definitely had a lot more information when the city handed over the documents to the Yale law students after the FOI suit went down. He definitely had more information when the civil lawsuit was filed.
Opportunities to come clean and give the
give
new
more information about what happened.
To lead the city and flesh out who did what, and if anybody, if there were any police. Yeah, what it sounds like he did was he put the police department in quite a bit of jeopardy, because now they're left to try to explain what we know that they did, that he claims he didn't know about.
And also in the suit itself, you know, and it's unfortunate we don't have enough time. There's going to be other shows that are going to be going on to give more details about what happened. And most importantly, I am going to make this deposition available for the entire public so they can read for themselves, as well as other depositions that were done in this case. You know, Danbury had a big role in this matter, much bigger than what this mayor was stating. And I think it is incumbent upon the public to get the full details on this because, again, it's our tax money that paid for the settlement. And it's important to know that there was actually no suit done. This case was settled, so we won't ever find out all the details about this. There won't be any more cross-examination of witnesses on the city's behalf as well as on the Danbury 11's behalf. So we won't get all the details, but we have these depositions. And we know that after these depositions were done, not long later after these depositions were done, we have a settlement.
As we're running low on time, you had brought up a point earlier when we were just in conversation with each other. It seems like other mayors, other elected officials have been certainly thrown out of office for less.
Again,
you know.
it's not the crime; it's the cover-up. It's being disloyal to the public. You got Perez, John Rowland. There's a whole host of figures, but you know.
Just quickly before we sign off, and the question is it incumbent upon the press to do their job, the local press?
I think it's very important local issue and get to the bottom of this.
We're going to have to break off there. This is Progressive Soup. David Stevenson, this one, our guest Al Robinson, and another great conversation. Good night.